"Will Santa come this year, Miss Hazel?" Mia's small voice trembled in the heat. The 6-year-old stood barefoot on the sun-bleached steps of St. Helena Home for Children, clutching a cloth doll whose stuffing showed through the seams. Around her, the Red Mesa desert glowed under the late November sun, waves of heat bending the air as if Christmas were still a lifetime away. Hazel Briggs stopped sweeping the dusty porch. Sweat rolled down her temples, soaking the collar of her faded dress. 14 children sat scattered across the yard, fanning themselves with scraps of cardboard, each one silently waiting for Hazel's answer. She forced a smile, crouching down so her eyes met Mia's. "Why do you ask, sweetheart?" Mia shifted, toes digging into the warm sand. "Because last year Santa brought us oranges, and Sister Agnes said maybe someone would help again, but no one came. Is he mad at us?" Hazel felt something twist inside her. The pantry shelves flashed through her mind. 1 tin of lard, a little cornmeal, a handful of beans, barely enough to stretch through the week, much less for a Christmas supper. Burning Well had suffered the worst drought in 20 years, and folks were struggling to feed their own families. There were no donations, no charity wagon, and no miracles coming. "Listen to me," Hazel said gently, brushing a dust smear from the girl's cheek. "Santa isn't mad at anyone. He's just having a hard time traveling through the desert this year. But I promise you this. On Christmas Eve, you won't go to bed hungry. Not one of you will." She stood, letting the broom lean against her hip. The promise tasted heavy on her tongue. She had no money, no food to spare, and only 30 days until Christmas. But Hazel Briggs had grown up in this very orphanage. She'd survived summers hotter than this. She would not let these children face a joyless holiday. Tomorrow, she would go into town. Tomorrow, she would find work, no matter what it took. Hazel reached Burning Well just after noon on November 24th. The ride from St. Helena had been long and jostling, and the heat rising off the red stone made the whole town shimmer like a mirage. She tied the mule to a post outside the general store, smoothed her dress, and whispered, "Just one job, that's all I need." But Burning Well wasn't a town that gave chances easily. The cafe turned her away first, the owner claiming she would clog up the aisles. The laundry house was no better. The woman admitted Hazel was strong, but said customers didn't like seeing big girls handling their nice linens. Even the boarding house keeper didn't let her finish her sentence before shooing her away. By late afternoon, Hazel's feet ached. Dust clung to her hem, and her throat felt raw from the hot wind. She sat on the edge of a trough in the square, watching people come and go, feeling utterly invisible. A group of men lounged outside the saloon, half drunk and loud. One of them nudged his friend and tilted his chin toward Hazel. "There's the big girl again," he jeered. Another joked that maybe she could sew whale-sized corsets at the dressmakers, causing the group to roar with laughter. Hazel stood, keeping her eyes down, knowing that answering back only made things worse. As she walked past, a third man called out, "Hey, you want real work? Go see Calder Boone, the smith. He just loves girls built like oxen." More laughter followed her down the street. Hazel didn't know it was a cruel joke. She didn't know Calder Boone was the most feared, most temperamental man in the entire county. She only knew she needed work. When dusk fell, she found shelter in a small wagon shed behind the church, curling up on an empty grain sack with exhaustion heavy in her bones. Tomorrow, she told herself, she would try again. Hazel returned to the square early on November 25th. The air was already warming, though the sun had barely crept above the red cliffs. She drank from the pump behind the church, gathered her courage, and followed the directions the drunk men had shouted. Boone's Ironworks sat at the far end of town, half hidden behind stacks of scrap metal. The building was little more than open walls and a slanted roof, allowing heat to escape. Even from a distance, Hazel heard the sharp clang of hammer on steel. Inside, a broad, bare-chested man swung a hammer with frightening force. His skin was the color of baked clay, muscles cut deep beneath the sweat and soot. Sparks flew with each strike, lighting the shadows around him. This had to be Calder Boone. Hazel swallowed, suddenly understanding why the men had laughed. Boone plunged the glowing bar into a bucket, steam hissing upward like a desert snake, before finally glancing her way. "What do you want?" His voice was rough, like gravel scraped across iron. When Hazel stammered that she was looking for work, Boone grabbed another piece of steel without bothering to face her. "You came to the wrong place. I don't hire, and I don't need help. I can cook, clean, carry things. I'm strong." Hazel tried to argue, but Boone cut her off, telling her she was there because of a joke and didn't fit in. As sparks shot past her skirt, Hazel whispered that she wasn't there to cause trouble. Boone finally turned, his gaze dropping to her cracked shoes, her empty satchel, and her flushed face. For a moment, something in his expression shifted, not softening, but easing. He muttered about the work being dangerous and uncaring of feelings. "I don't need it to," Hazel replied, meeting his eyes. Boone exhaled sharply. "Fine, stay. For one day. But understand this. Here, a person's worth is measured by what they can do, not how they look. Earn it." Hazel's first day at Boone's Ironworks began with heat, thick, burning, suffocating heat that wrapped around her like a wool blanket dipped in fire. Calder Boone handed her a pair of worn gloves and pointed toward a crank attached to the bellows. "Keep the air steady," he said. "If the flame dips, I know it's your fault." The bellows were heavier than they looked. Hazel pushed and pulled until her shoulders trembled, sweat soaking through her dress within minutes. Calder didn't look at her again. He worked like a man carved from stone, hammer rising and falling with perfect rhythm. But the work didn't stay simple for long. "Coal bin," he barked. "Bring a fresh load." Hazel hurried to the back, filled a scuttle with black lumps, and carried it forward. Embers popped when she poured them in, sparks stinging her arm. She hissed under her breath, but Boone only said, "Watch the grip," before swinging at the glowing iron again. By midday, her gloves were scorched, her palms blistering beneath them. By mid-afternoon, she dropped a half-finished lantern frame. It clattered across the dirt. Boone's head snapped up. "If that had been the real piece, we'd start over. Don't be careless." Hazel replied softly, "I'm trying." He snapped back, "Try harder." She sucked in a breath, tied a strip of cloth around her wrist where a burn had reddened the skin, and went back to work. She pushed the bellows again, hauled coal again, sorted tools by size and shape until she could barely feel her fingers. But she didn't quit. Near sundown, Boone noticed the bellows hadn't faltered in hours. He noticed the coal bin refilled before he asked. He noticed the tools arranged neatly on the bench. He said nothing, only grunted and kept hammering, but his eyes followed her a little longer than before. The next days stretched into a rhythm, hard, hot, punishing. Hazel woke before sunrise, washed the soot from her hair with cold water from the pump, and returned to the forge while the sky was still pink. Boone wasn't gentle. "Too slow," he would say, or "Hold it steady," and "You're letting the heat bleed out." But Hazel learned. By the 10th day, she could identify the right temperature of the metal by color: orange-white for shaping, dull red for cutting. She could feed the bellows smoothly, enough to keep Boone satisfied. And sometimes, when he wasn't watching, Hazel practiced holding the metal tongs the way he did, mimicking his stance. Then came the evening when Boone returned from town with a folded order sheet in his hand. "Harlan Burke's party changed plans," he said. "Bigger crowd, more guests. We need 50 lanterns, and the gate arch has to be taller." Hazel scanned the list. Each lantern required 3 curved iron ribs, a base plate, and decorative star-shaped cutouts. The work doubled. "Can we finish in time?" Hazel asked. Boone shrugged. "We don't have a choice." They worked late into the night. Hazel mended her gloves twice. She burned her knuckle on a lantern frame but wrapped it in cloth and kept going. Boone watched her from the corner of his eye. "You're tougher than you look," he said gruffly. Hazel tried not to smile. "You're not so mean once a person gets used to you." Boone snorted. "Don't get used to me." But his voice held less bite. After midnight, Hazel prepared a pot of stew over the small stove behind the forge, while Boone hammered the last frame of the day. They ate sitting on opposite ends of the workbench, both too tired to speak. The lanterns glowed faintly beside them in a soft row, imperfect, warm, waiting. It was the first evening Hazel realized something. Boone trusted her enough to let her stay past dark. A week later, under the orange glow of the forge, something shifted. Hazel was filing the edges of a lantern base when Boone's voice cut through the hum of the bellows. "Stop for a minute." She set the file down. Boone wasn't frowning. That alone startled her. "You ever wonder why a man chooses iron for a living?" he asked. Hazel blinked. "I thought you chose it because you're good at it." Boone leaned back against the anvil, arms crossed over his chest, the firelight carving deep shadows across his muscles. "I chose it because it listens. It doesn't lie. You hit it, it changes. You heat it, it softens. You let it cool, it hardens. People—" His jaw tightened. "People aren't like that." Hazel sensed something raw beneath his words. "Someone hurt you?" Boone didn't answer at first. Then, quietly, "I grew up in a place like St. Helena. Not that exact one, but close. Left when I was 12. Nobody stayed long enough to raise me. Nobody cared if I ate or slept. The forge was the only thing that ever kept me warm." Hazel felt her chest tighten. She imagined a young Calder Boone, thin, angry, alone, curling beside a dying fire. No wonder he held himself like iron, hard and unyielding. She spoke softly. "The children at St. Helena, they don't have much, but Sister Agnes cares, and I do. That's why I came here. I wanted to earn enough for them to have a real Christmas. Just once." Boone's eyes lifted to hers, and for the first time, Hazel saw something gentle beneath the soot and scars. "You're doing all this for them," he murmured. Hazel nodded. "They deserve something bright." Boone exhaled through his nose, almost like a laugh. "You're stubborn, Briggs," Hazel replied. "You too." The forge crackled between them, warm and steady, like 2 lives, once separate, now beginning to bend toward the same flame. By the middle of December, the forge looked different. Lantern frames lined the tables in neat rows, while curved iron ribs leaned against the wall. The air smelled of hot metal and stew, and something else Hazel could not name yet. Maybe it was hope, or maybe it was possibility. Calder Boone checked the order sheet again, noting the delivery wagon from Harlan Burke would arrive on the 23rd. There was still the large archway to finish for the entrance of the Christmas party, so he traced the sketch with a calloused finger, studying the two tall pillars and a center beam shaped like a rising star, which would take both of them to assemble. Hazel worked beside him with steady hands. Her palms were rough now. She no longer dropped tools or flinched when sparks jumped at her sleeves, and Boone noticed all of it. One evening, the lanterns were nearly finished. Hazel wiped her forehead and stepped back as the table glowed with 50 small bodies of iron. Boone stood beside her and nodded once. "You did real work here," he said. Hazel felt warmth rise in her chest. "We did it together." Boone looked away, almost embarrassed. Maybe so. The next morning they assembled the arch. Hazel held the base steady, while Boone tightened the bolts. Then he lifted the top beam with one arm, while Hazel guided it with both hands. When it clicked into place, they stood back and looked at what they had made. A tall frame of iron against the red desert light, strong and simple and honest. Hazel smiled. "This will make the children at the party happy." Boone studied her expression for a moment, and something softened in his face. "You should have more than a few coins for this," he said. Hazel shook her head. "All I need is enough for the children." Boone did not argue. He only turned back to the arch and tightened one more bolt with slow, careful force. On the morning of December 23rd, the delivery wagon arrived. Boone inspected each lantern once more, then helped load them onto the cart, while Hazel tied the last bundle of wire. When Burke's men counted the pieces, they nodded in approval, and Boone collected the payment in a small canvas pouch. When the wagon rolled away, Hazel felt a strange emptiness, because the lanterns had filled the forge for weeks, and now the tables were bare. She rubbed the back of her hand where a scar had begun to form. Boone opened the pouch and counted the coins. Then he placed half of them in Hazel's hands, plus a small bonus wrapped in cloth. "You earned every bit of this," he said. "Take it." Hazel blinked at the amount. Calder, "This is too much." Boone shook his head. "No, it is not, and not a word more about it." The cloth he handed her was heavier than she expected. Inside, she found 3 small gifts: a star cut from polished iron, a pair of tiny bells, and a hook shaped like a crescent moon. "For your tree at St. Helena," Boone said, "or whatever you make for the children." Hazel closed her fingers around the gifts. "Thank you. Truly." She hesitated, then gathered her courage. "Calder, will you come to the orphanage tomorrow night? The children have never had anyone visit for Christmas. It would mean a lot if you came." Boone took a step back, looking at his chest and arms still marked with soot. "I look like a mountain bear. I will scare them." Hazel shook her head. "You said a person's worth is in what they do, not how they look. You built light and joy with your own hands. Why be afraid of children who only want kindness?" Boone stared at her for a long, quiet moment, until a slow, crooked smile appeared. Not forced, not guarded, simply real. "All right, Briggs, I will come." Hazel felt her throat tighten. She nodded and slipped the gifts into her satchel as the sun dipped low behind the red cliffs. Christmas Eve arrived warm and bright as Hazel walked beside Boone toward St. Helena. He carried a burlap sack over one shoulder containing wooden toys he had carved at night, simple pieces made with steady hands. The children were outside when they approached, and Sister Agnes waved from the doorway, though the little ones froze when they saw Boone because he filled the entrance like a shadow. Broad and tall and barely contained by a clean shirt, that still hung open at the chest because of the heat. Hazel bent down and whispered to Boone, "Smile, just a little. They need to see you are gentle." Boone tried, and though the first attempt looked like a grimace, Hazel nodded in approval. Mia stepped forward holding a striped candy and looked up at Boone with wide eyes. "Sir, are you one of the giants who helped Santa?" Boone knelt so he no longer towered above her and accepted the candy with careful fingers. "Yes, Santa sent me ahead. His wagon broke in the desert, so I walked." Mia giggled and reached for his hand. "Come see our tree." The tree was a tall cactus they had decorated with cloth ribbons. Hazel handed Boone the iron star he had made, and he lifted Mia with one arm, holding her steady, while she placed the star on top of the cactus. The children cheered and their voices rose through the warm evening air. Soon they surrounded Boone, tugging at his sleeves and asking about Santa, asking if giants ate soup, and asking if he could lift 2 children at once. Boone answered in short, simple sentences, and even lifted 3 of them at the same time. Hazel could not remember ever seeing him laugh, but he did now, and the sound was low and rough but warm. Hazel watched from a few steps away as Sister Agnes touched her arm and whispered, "He looks different beside them." Hazel nodded. He just needed a place to belong. As the sun faded and the lanterns he had made flickered to life around the yard, the forge heat of the past month seemed far away. Boone stood among the children holding Mia on his shoulder, while Hazel stood beside him. For the first time in years, St. Helena felt bright, warm, and whole.